Every Friday night, a broken father sat in a diner with 2 plates of spaghetti. One for him, one for the daughter he'd never hold again. For 3 years, he'd been having dinner with a ghost. The waitress never asked why. The other diners never stared. Because everyone in that small town knew. Ethan Harper's heart died the day he buried his little girl. Then one cold November night, the door opened. A thin, trembling woman stood there, clutching her son's hand. The boy's eyes were hollow, hungry, afraid. "Please," she whispered. "My son, he hasn't eaten in 2 days. Can we just sit here for a while?" Ethan looked up, and for the first time in 3 years he felt something other than emptiness. He saw his daughter in that little boy's frightened face. He motioned to the empty seat across from him, the seat that had been waiting. Her name was Sophie Lane, and she wasn't just hungry, she was running. Running from a violent ex-husband who'd sworn he'd find her. Running from a past that refused to let her go. Running toward a stranger who had nothing left to lose. What Sophie didn't know was this: Ethan Harper had failed to protect his daughter. But he'd be damned if he'd fail to protect this little boy. In the weeks that followed, something impossible began to happen. A grieving father, a desperate mother, a frightened child. 3 broken people, stitching together a family from the fragments of their shattered lives. But when Sophie's ex-husband tracked them down, fists clenched and rage burning, Ethan would have to make a choice: stay locked in his grief, or fight for the family he thought he'd never have again. This is a story about second chances. About the moment when a stranger's kindness becomes a lifeline. About how love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it walks through a diner door on a cold night and asks, "Can we sit here?" Because sometimes the family you need isn't the one you lost. It's the one that finds you when you've stopped looking. Before we dive in, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love connecting with you. And if stories about second chances, unexpected families, and the courage to love again touch your heart the way they touch ours, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You'll want to be here for what happens next. Trust me on that, because what started with 2 plates of spaghetti would end with 3, but the road between grief and healing, it would be darker and more dangerous than any of them could have imagined. This is the story of Ethan Harper, and the night everything changed. Let me paint you a picture of what Friday nights looked like for Ethan Harper. 6:30, every single week without fail. He'd walk through the door of Mel's diner, and the bell would chime. That same cheerful jingle that felt like a cruel joke every time. Betty, the waitress who'd worked there for 23 years, would look up from behind the counter. Their eyes would meet. No words needed. Just a sad, knowing nod between 2 people who understood that some wounds never heal. They just become part of you. Ethan would slide into the same booth by the window. The vinyl seat cracked and worn, molded to his shape after 3 years of this ritual. And Betty would bring 2 plates of spaghetti. One for him, one for the ghost sitting across from him. The other diners had learned not to stare. At first, there'd been whispers, curious glances, a few brave souls who'd tried to ask if someone was joining him. But Betty shut that down fast. One sharp look from her was enough to silence anyone who didn't understand that this man's grief was sacred ground. Now, 3 years later, people just knew. The businessman in the corner booth would lower his voice when Ethan arrived. The young couple by the door would glance over with sympathy in their eyes. Even the jukebox seemed to play softer songs on Friday nights, as if the whole diner understood it was hosting a memorial service disguised as dinner. Ethan would sit there, staring at that second plate, the steam rising from the spaghetti, the fork placed just so. The napkin folded the way Lily always liked it, into a triangle because she said it looked fancy. And for 1 hour he'd let himself remember. Lily Harper had been 7 years old when she died. 7 years, 4 months, and 16 days to be exact. Ethan knew because he counted every single one of those days like they were gold coins he'd lost and could never get back. She'd been everything to him. After his wife died of cancer when Lily was just 2, it had been the two of them against the world. Father and daughter. A team. Lily had her mother's smile. Bright and unguarded. The kind that made you smile back even if you were having the worst day of your life. She'd loved spaghetti. Loved his motorcycle shop, where she'd help by handing him the wrong tools and asking a million questions he never got tired of answering. Dad, why do engines make that sound? Dad, can I ride a motorcycle when I grow up? Dad, do you think Mama's proud of us? Every question was precious. Every moment was a gift he hadn't known he should treasure more. Until she was gone. It happened on a Tuesday. A rainy, unremarkable Tuesday that should have been like any other. Ethan was at the shop, working on a vintage Harley, when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. God, he wished he hadn't. Mr. Harper? This is Detective Morrison. There's been an accident involving your daughter. The wrench fell from his hand, clattered against the concrete floor. But Ethan didn't hear it. All he heard was the detective's voice, calm and professional, delivering words that shattered his entire world. A driver ran a red light. Your daughter was crossing the street after school. The paramedics did everything they could. But what? Ethan's voice didn't sound like his own. A pause. Too long. I'm so sorry, Mr. Harper. She didn't make it. Ethan didn't remember much about the funeral. Just fragments. The too small casket. Lily's favorite purple bracelet on her wrist. The one he'd bought her at the county fair. The driver who killed her standing in the back, crying. College kid. Texting while driving. One moment of carelessness. People kept saying things. She's in a better place. God needed another angel. Time heals all wounds. Ethan wanted to scream at them. She wasn't supposed to be an angel. She was supposed to be here. But he didn't scream. He just nodded. Shook hands. Accepted casseroles he'd never eat. And when everyone finally left, when the house fell silent, Ethan walked into Lily's room. Her backpack still hung by the door. Her stuffed animals lined up on her bed. Exactly how she'd left them. Her drawing of the two of them. Stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Taped to the wall. He stood there for hours. And realized he'd stopped breathing somewhere along the way. The first Friday after she died, Ethan couldn't stay in that house. The silence was suffocating. Her absence was everywhere. In every corner, every photograph, every toy she'd never play with again. So he went to Mel's diner. Their place. The place where they'd spent every Friday night together. Her chattering about her week while he stole bites of her garlic bread. He sat in their booth. And when Betty came over, pen poised over her notepad, he heard himself say, 2 plates of spaghetti. Betty's hand froze. Her eyes filled with tears. She blinked away fast. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and brought him 2 plates. Ethan stared at the second plate that night and felt insane. What are you doing? She's dead. She's not coming back. But he couldn't stop. For 1 hour, he let himself pretend she was just in the bathroom. That any second, she'd come skipping back to the table, sliding into the booth with that gap-toothed grin. The food went cold. He barely touched his, never touched hers. But it didn't matter, because for 60 precious minutes she was there. So he came back the next Friday, and the next, and the next, week after week, month after month, year after year. 2 plates, 1 ghost, 1 broken man who couldn't let go. This Friday started like all the others. Ethan locked up the motorcycle shop at 6:15. Drove to Mel's in his old pickup truck, the one Lily had named Big Blue. Walked through the door at exactly 6:30. The bell jingled. Betty looked up, gave him that sad smile. He nodded back, slid into the booth. The spaghetti arrived moments later, steam curling up from both plates. Ethan picked up his fork. The diner hummed with quiet conversation. Dishes clinked. The jukebox played something soft and forgettable. Everything was exactly as it always was. Until the door opened. The bell jingled again. Ethan didn't look up at first. But then he heard it. A small voice. Frightened. Young. Mama, I'm so hungry. Ethan's fork froze halfway to his mouth. His chest tightened. That voice. A child's voice. He forced himself not to look. Not to hope. Not to break. But then he heard the woman. Thin. Desperate. Her voice cracking. I know, baby. Just hold on a little longer. Okay? Against every instinct, Ethan looked up. And there she was. A woman he'd never seen before. Standing just inside the door. Thin. Pale. Exhausted in a way that went bone deep. And clutching her hand was a little boy, maybe 6 years old, with hollow eyes and clothes that hung too loose on his small frame. The boy's gaze swept the diner and landed on Ethan. On the 2 plates of spaghetti. On the empty seat. The woman noticed Ethan staring. For a moment, she looked like she might turn and leave. But then she took a breath. Shaky, desperate, and walked toward him. Each step looked like it cost her everything. She stopped at his booth. Up close, Ethan could see the fading bruise on her cheekbone, poorly hidden beneath makeup. He could see the way her hands trembled, the way her son pressed against her side, as if she were the only safe thing in a dangerous world. I'm sorry to bother you, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. My son. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. We don't have any money. I just thought, maybe we could sit here for a while? Just until he warms up. She wasn't asking for food. She was asking for mercy. For a moment where her child didn't have to be cold and scared and hungry. Ethan looked at the boy. Really looked. And his heart cracked wide open. The boy had dark hair where Lily's had been blonde. Brown eyes where hers had been hazel. But he had the same thing Lily always had. Trust. That fragile, precious belief that grown-ups could fix things. That the world wasn't as terrifying as it seemed. That someone somewhere would help. Ethan's throat closed up. His hand moved before his brain could stop it. He gestured to the empty seat across from him. Lily's seat. The seat no one had sat in for 3 years. Sit, he said, his voice rough. Please. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. She slid into the booth, pulling her son close beside her. The boy stared at the plate of spaghetti like it was a miracle. Can I? The woman asked, her voice breaking. Ethan pushed the plate toward the boy. It's for him. The boy, Daniel, Ethan would learn later, picked up the fork with trembling hands. He twirled the spaghetti clumsily, took a bite, and closed his eyes like he was tasting heaven. Sophie, that was her name, watched her son eat with tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means. Ethan shook his head, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He didn't know why he'd done it. Didn't know why this woman, this boy, had broken through 3 years of carefully constructed walls. But sitting there, watching Daniel devour the plate meant for Lily's ghost, something shifted inside him. For the first time since his daughter died, Ethan Harper felt something other than grief. He felt needed, and that changed everything. Betty had been watching from behind the counter. She'd seen a lot in her 23 years at Mel's diner. Heartbreak, reconciliation, first dates and last goodbyes. But she'd never seen this. She'd never seen anyone sit in Lily's seat. For a moment, Betty thought about intervening, about protecting Ethan from whatever this was. But then she saw his face. And for the first time in 3 years, he didn't look dead inside. He looked present. So Betty did what she did best. She grabbed another plate of spaghetti, a glass of water, and a chocolate milkshake, the kind kids loved. She set them down on the table without a word. Sophie looked up, confusion and gratitude warring in her eyes. "I didn't order." "On the house," Betty said firmly. Then she looked at Ethan, and something passed between them. A question. "Are you sure about this?" An answer. "I don't know, but I have to try." Betty nodded and walked away. For several minutes, the only sound was Daniel eating. He ate like a child who'd learned that food wasn't guaranteed. Fast. Desperate. As if the plate might vanish if he slowed down. Sophie watched him, one hand resting on his small shoulder. Tears she didn't bother to hide streaming down her face. Ethan stared at his own untouched plate. His heart was hammering. His hands were shaking. What am I doing? This isn't Lily. This won't bring her back. But when he looked at Daniel, sauce on his chin, eyes closed in pure relief, something inside him whispered, maybe it's not about bringing her back. Maybe it's about not letting another child suffer. Finally, Sophie spoke. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming or crying for days. Maybe both.
"I'm Sophie."
"Sophie Lane. This is my son, Daniel." Ethan nodded. "Ethan Harper." "Thank you," she said again. "You don't know what you just did for us." "You don't owe me anything," Ethan said quietly. But Sophie shook her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Yes, I do. We've been on the road for 3 days, sleeping in the car. I ran out of money yesterday. Daniel hasn't complained once, but I knew he was hungry. I knew." Her voice broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting for composure. Daniel looked up at his mother, then at Ethan. "It's okay, Mama," the boy said softly. "The nice man gave us food. We're okay now." The simple trust in that statement nearly broke Ethan. Ethan knew he should let it go. This woman and her son weren't his responsibility. He'd done his good deed, fed a hungry child. That should be enough. But when he looked at Sophie, at the bruise on her cheek, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held her son like someone might rip him away at any moment, he couldn't stop himself. "Why are you running?" Sophie's head snapped up. Fear flashed across her face. I'm not." "Yes, you are," Ethan said gently. "You don't have to tell me. But if you need help." He trailed off, not sure what he was offering. Help? From him? A man who couldn't even help himself? Sophie studied him for a long moment. Maybe she saw something in his face. Some recognition of pain. Some understanding that only broken people can see in each other. Because she took a shaky breath and said, "My ex-husband, Daniel's father." She said the word father like it was poison. "He's not a good man. I tried to leave before, but he always found us. Always dragged us back. But this time," her voice hardened. "This time I'm not going back. I don't care what it takes." Daniel had stopped eating, his small body tense. Ethan saw the fear in the boy's eyes. The same fear he'd seen in Lily's eyes once, when she'd had a nightmare and woken up screaming, "Dad, don't let the monsters get me." "I won't, sweetheart. I promise." A promise he'd kept until the day a different kind of monster, a texting driver, careless and distracted, had stolen her away. "Where are you staying tonight?" Ethan asked. Sophie looked away. "The car. It's supposed to drop below freezing." "I know." Ethan's jaw tightened. He thought about that car, about this woman and her small son, huddled together in the cold, trying to stay warm with nothing but hope and desperation. He thought about Lily, about how she used to crawl into his bed during thunderstorms, seeking safety. "Dad, will you keep me safe?" "Always, Lily. Always." But he hadn't. He'd failed. And maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to not fail again. The words came out before he could stop them. "I have a motorcycle shop. There's a back room with a cot and a heater. It's not much, but it's warm. You and Daniel can stay there tonight." Sophie's eyes went wide. We couldn't possibly. Yes, you can, Ethan said firmly. I'm not letting you sleep in your car when it's below freezing. And before you argue, understand this isn't charity. It's, he paused, searching for the right words. It's what someone should have done for me when I needed it. Sophie stared at him. Every instinct probably screamed at her not to trust a stranger. She'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with strings attached. That men who offered help usually wanted something in return. But when she looked at Ethan Harper, really looked at him, she didn't see that. She saw grief, exhaustion, a man who understood what it meant to lose everything. And maybe, just maybe, she saw someone who genuinely wanted to help. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for us? Ethan looked at the second plate of spaghetti, the one Daniel had demolished. The plate that had sat untouched for 3 years, waiting for a daughter who would never come back. Because someone needed to sit in that seat, he said quietly. And I think maybe your son was meant to be here tonight. Sophie's tears started fresh. But this time, they weren't tears of desperation. They were tears of relief. As they stood to leave, Betty caught Ethan's arm. You sure about this? She asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. No. But I'm doing it anyway. Betty studied him for a moment, then squeezed his hand. Your Lily would be proud of you. Ethan's throat closed up. He couldn't speak, so he just nodded and led Sophie and Daniel out into the cold November night. Ethan's motorcycle shop was 10 minutes from the diner. A small, weathered building with Harper's Custom Cycles, painted on a fading sign above the door. It had been his father's shop before him, the place where he'd learned everything about engines and metal and hard work, the place where Lily had spent countless afternoons helping him fix bikes and asking questions that made him see the world through her curious eyes. Now it was just a building, place to work, a way to fill the empty hours. Sophie and Daniel followed him in her car, a beat-up sedan with a cracked windshield and a missing hubcap. When they pulled up, Sophie looked at the shop with something like hope in her eyes. You own this? Yeah, Ethan said. My dad left it to me. It's not much, but it pays the bills. He unlocked the door and led them inside. The shop smelled like oil and metal and leather, familiar smells that used to comfort him. Motorcycles in various states of repair lined the walls. Tools hung on pegboards. A radio sat silent in the corner. And in the back, through a narrow door, was the room he'd mentioned. It wasn't much. A cot with a thin mattress, a space heater, some old blankets stacked in a corner. Ethan had slept here sometimes, back when the house felt too big and too empty to bear, but he hadn't used it in months. Now he pulled out the blankets, plugged in the heater and turned to Sophie. It's not a palace, but it'll keep you warm. Sophie looked around the small room like it was the Ritz. It's perfect, she whispered. Thank you. Thank you so much. Daniel was already climbing onto the cot, his eyelids drooping. The warmth, the full stomach, the sense of safety, it was all catching up with him. Sophie tucked the blanket around her son, then turned to Ethan. I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to, Ethan said. Just get some rest. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. He started to leave, then paused at the door. Sophie? Yes. Lock this door behind me. And if you need anything at all, my number's on the business card on the workbench. Don't hesitate to call. Sophie nodded, fresh tears in her eyes. Ethan? He turned back. Why are you really doing this? Ethan looked at Daniel, already asleep, his small face finally peaceful. Because 3 years ago I lost my daughter, and I couldn't save her. But maybe I can save him. Ethan drove home in silence. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tight. His mind raced. What the hell did you just do? You don't know these people. She could be lying. Her ex could show up. You could be putting yourself in danger. But beneath all the rational objections was something else. A feeling he hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. For the first time since Lily died, Ethan Harper had a reason to wake up in the morning. Not just to exist. Not just to go through the motions. But to help. To protect. To save. And even though it terrified him, even though he knew he might fail again, he couldn't turn back now. Because that little boy, sleeping safely in his shop, deserved someone to fight for him. And Ethan was tired of running from his own heart. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Ethan made a promise. Not to Lily, though he felt her presence like a whisper in the dark. Not to Sophie or Daniel, who were strangers trusting him with their lives. But to himself. I couldn't save you, Lily, but I can save them. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough. Outside, the wind howled. The temperature dropped. And in a small back room of a motorcycle shop, a mother and her son slept peacefully for the first time in months. Protected. Safe. Because a broken man had decided that his grief didn't have to be the end of his story. Could be the beginning of someone else's. Morning came cold and gray. Ethan arrived at the shop at 7, coffee in hand, not sure what he'd find. Part of him wondered if Sophie and Daniel would still be there, or if they'd vanished in the night like a dream he'd imagined. But when he unlocked the door, he heard voices. Soft, quiet, alive. He knocked gently on the backroom door. It's Ethan. The door opened. Sophie stood there, hair pulled back, eyes less hollow than the night before. Behind her, Daniel sat on the cot, playing with a small toy car he must have carried in his pocket. Good morning, Sophie said. We were just about to leave. We didn't want to impose. Stay, Ethan said. The word came out more forcefully than he intended. Sophie blinked. What? Stay. At least until you figure out your next move. I open the shop at 8. You can help out if you want or just rest. Whatever you need. Sophie's eyes filled with tears again. Ethan was beginning to realize this woman had spent so long running. She'd forgotten what it felt like when someone said stay. I can work, she said quickly. I can answer phones, organize, clean, whatever you need. I won't freeload. You're not freeloading. You're surviving. Daniel looked up at Ethan with those two serious eyes. Are you a good guy, Mr. Ethan? The question hit like a punch to the chest. Ethan crouched down to the boy's level. I'm trying to be, buddy. Daniel studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay. Mama says we should only trust good guys. Your mama's smart. That first day together was awkward. Cautious. Like 3 people learning a new dance, trying not to step on each other's toes. Sophie organized his chaotic filing system. Papers he'd ignored for months suddenly made sense. Daniel colored at the workbench, occasionally asking questions about the motorcycles. Why do they have 2 wheels instead of 4? What makes them go fast? Can Mama ride one? Questions that reminded Ethan of Lily. Of the daughter who'd asked a million questions and never lived long enough to hear all the answers. By noon, something had shifted. The shop felt less empty, the silence less suffocating. And when Daniel laughed at something, a joke Ethan made about a stubborn bolt, the sound echoed through the shop like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Ethan hadn't heard a child laugh in 3 years. He'd forgotten how much he'd missed it. 3 days passed. Then a week. Sophie and Daniel settled into a rhythm. She worked during the day, answering calls, greeting customers, keeping the books organized. Daniel went to the small library down the street, where a kind librarian let him read for hours. Evenings they'd eat together. Simple meals. Nothing fancy, but together. And slowly Sophie began to talk. About her ex-husband, Marcus. About the first time he hit her 6 months after they were married. About how she'd stayed because she thought she could fix him. Change him. Love him enough to make him stop. About the day she realized he'd never change. The day she realized if she didn't leave, he'd eventually kill her. Or worse, hurt Daniel. I left in the middle of the night, Sophie said quietly one evening. Took Daniel, some clothes, and whatever cash I'd hidden. I've been running for 2 months. Does he know where you are? Ethan asked. Sophie's face went pale. I don't think so. But Marcus, he's relentless. He has connections. Friends in law enforcement. He always said if I left, he'd find me. Fear flickered in her eyes. And when he does... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Ethan saw the terror there. The certainty that Marcus would make her pay for leaving. Something hardened in Ethan's chest. A resolve he hadn't felt in years. If he comes here, Ethan said quietly, he'll have to go through me first. Sophie looked at him, tears streaming. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us. Ethan thought about Lily. About all the times he'd promised to protect her. About the one time he'd failed. Because I couldn't protect the person I loved most, he said. But maybe I can protect you. The weeks blurred together. Sophie enrolled Daniel in the local elementary school. She found a part-time job at a cafe 3 blocks away. Just enough to start saving money. But she still stayed in the back room of Ethan's shop. Not because she had to, but because, for the first time in years, she felt safe. Ethan found himself looking forward to mornings, to Daniel's questions, to Sophie's quiet presence, to the way the shop felt less like a tomb and more like a home. One night, as they sat eating takeout Chinese food, Daniel looked up at Ethan. Mr. Ethan, do you have kids? The question froze Ethan mid-bite. Sophie's eyes went wide. Daniel, that's not... I had a daughter, Ethan said quietly. Her name was Lily. Where is she? Daniel asked innocently. She's in heaven, buddy. Daniel processed this with the solemn wisdom of a child who'd seen too much. My grandma's in heaven too. Mama says heaven is where people go when they're too special for earth. Ethan's throat tightened. Your mama's right. Daniel nodded, then went back to his fried rice. But Sophie reached across the table and squeezed Ethan's hand. No words, just understanding. 2 broken people, finding comfort in shared grief. It happened on a Tuesday, 3 months after Sophie and Daniel had walked into Ethan's life. 3 months of slowly healing, slowly hoping. Ethan was under a motorcycle, wrench in hand, when he heard the door slam open. Footsteps, heavy, angry, a voice that made his blood run cold. Where is she? Ethan rolled out from under the bike. A man stood in the doorway, tall, muscular, face twisted with rage. Marcus. Sophie appeared from the back room, her face white with terror. Marcus, please. You think you can leave me? Marcus snarled. You think you can take my son and just disappear? He's not your son anymore, Sophie said, her voice shaking but firm. You lost that right when you put your hands on me. Marcus lunged forward, but Ethan stepped between them. Get out of my shop. Marcus looked at Ethan like he was an insect. This doesn't concern you, old man. She's under my protection. So yeah, it does. Marcus laughed. A cruel, ugly sound. Protection? From you. He shoved Ethan hard. Ethan stumbled back but didn't fall. 3 years of grief had hollowed him out. But it had also made him fearless. Because when you've already lost everything, there's nothing left to be afraid of. I'm giving you one chance, Ethan said quietly. Walk away. Don't come back. Or what? Or I'll make you. Marcus swung. His fist connected with Ethan's jaw. Pain exploded through his skull. But Ethan didn't go down. He swung back. It wasn't clean or heroic. It was brutal, desperate. 2 men fighting for different reasons. Marcus fought to reclaim what he thought he owned. Ethan fought to protect what he'd found. They crashed into workbenches. Tools scattered. A motorcycle tipped over. Sophie screamed. Daniel cried. And then sirens. Betty from the diner had called the police when she'd seen Marcus storm into the shop. officers burst through the door, pulling the men apart. Marcus was arrested. Outstanding warrants, assault, violation of a restraining order Sophie had filed years ago. As they dragged him away, he screamed at Sophie, "This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over." But Sophie didn't flinch. She just held Daniel close and watched the man who'd tormented her for years disappear into a police car. The months after Marcus's arrest were like thawing after a long winter. Slowly, carefully, but undeniably, Sophie found a better job, saved money, started therapy. Daniel thrived in school, made friends, smiled more. And Ethan started living again. Not just existing, not just going through the motions, actually living. They became a family without ever saying the word out loud. Friday nights, they'd go to Mel's diner. 3 plates of spaghetti now. Betty would smile every time. Sophie and Ethan really talked about loss and fear and hope, about what it meant to love again after grief, about whether broken people could build something whole. One night, sitting on the porch of the shop, Sophie turned to Ethan. "I never asked you about Lily, about what happened." Ethan took a breath, and for the first time in 3 years he told the whole story. The rain, the driver, the hospital, the unbearable weight of saying goodbye. Sophie listened, tears streaming, her hand in his. "She'd be proud of you," Sophie said softly, "for what you did for us." "I hope so," Ethan whispered. "I know so." 6 months after that November night, Ethan returned to Mel's diner on a Friday. But this time he wasn't alone. Sophie slid into the booth across from him. Daniel sat beside her, coloring on a placemat. Betty brought 3 plates of spaghetti without being asked. Ethan looked at the 3 plates. 1 for him, 1 for Sophie, 1 for Daniel. And beside Daniel's plate, Lily's blue backpack still sat. A quiet reminder that she would always be part of this family. But next to it, Daniel had placed his red backpack. 2 backpacks, 2 children, 1 living, 1 forever loved. Sophie reached across the table and took Ethan's hand. "You okay?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her, at Daniel, at the life they'd built from broken pieces. "Yeah," he said, "I think I am." Because healing didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean replacing what you'd lost. It meant learning that love could exist in multiple places at once. In memory and in presence. In grief and in hope. In what was and what could be. Ethan Harper had spent 3 years eating dinner with a ghost. But now he was eating dinner with a family. A family born from kindness. From courage. From the simple act of offering an empty seat to someone who needed it. And as they ate and talked and laughed, Ethan realized something. Lily would always be his daughter. But Sophie and Daniel? They were his second chance. His unexpected miracle. His proof that even in the darkest grief, light could find its way in. All because one cold November night, a desperate mother had asked a simple question. "Can we sit here?" And a broken father had said yes. This is Ethan's story. Sophie's story. Daniel's story. But maybe it's your story too. A reminder that sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into. It's the one we choose. If this story touched your heart, do us a favor. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. And drop a comment telling us what family means to you. We'd love to hear your story too, because we're all just walking each other home. And sometimes that walk starts with 2 plates of spaghetti and ends with 3.